I'm Bronwyn Williams. We're back with the small print, and today my guest is Cindy Gallop. Now, Cindy, on this show, we always ask our guests to please introduce themselves the way they would like to be introduced. So please do tell us who you are and where in the world you are and what you're passionate about.
Sure. So I am Cindy Gallop. I'm the founder and CEO of MakeLoveNotPorn. We are pro-sex, pro-porn, pro-knowing the difference. I'm coming to you from my apartment in New York, in the center of New York City. I live in Midtown Manhattan on Fifth Avenue at 39th. And by the way, I apologize for the fact that the heating is on in my apartment building. The pipes may clang. I have no control over that sound effect, I'm afraid. And I am passionate about changing the world through sex.
That's an amazing. I do not love that. And no need to apologize for clanging pipes. We're from South Africa, where our electricity comes and goes at the will of government officials. So we're well used to interruptions of all stripes and all sorts. No problems there. Now, the reason for us inviting you on the show, and usually we talk about politics, philosophy, and economic kind of issues here, but for some time we've been looking for someone locally in South Africa, actually, to talk about decriminalizing the sex industry. And we've actually fallen flat on that because that's still illegal for most of our society right now. And instead, I thought I'd lean to you because you've been at the forefront of, if not decriminalizing, at least destigmatizing the sex industry in quite a unique way. So I'm quite familiar with your background. I've been following you for years. I first heard about you at like a tech marketing presentation by a lady by the name of Heidi Patmore, who's a great fan of yours. So thanks, Heidi, for bringing me to your attention, or for bringing you to my attention. But I wanted to start off with saying, what is Make Love Not Porn, for those who are not familiar with it, rather than my bad interpretation? Why don't you tell our listeners yourself?
Sure. So Make Love Not Porn is first and foremost a complete accident. As in, I never set out to do anything I very bizarrely find myself doing now. We are literally the startup the world asked for. And what I mean by that is Make Love Not Porn came about because I date younger men. They tend to be in their 20s. And 16 years ago now, I realized through dating younger men that I was encountering very personally and intimately what happens when two things converge. And I stress the dual convergence, Bronwyn, because most people think it's only one thing. I realized I was experiencing what happens when today's total freedom of access to hardcore porn online meets our society's equally total reluctance to talk openly and honestly about sex. When those two factors converge, porn becomes sex education by default, in not a good way. So I thought, as a naturally action-oriented person, I want to do something about this. So 15 years ago, I put up on no money, purely as a side venture, a tiny clunky website at MakeLoveNotPorn.com that in its original version was just words. The construct was porn world versus real world. Here's what happens in the porn world. Here's what really happens in the real world. I launched Make Love Not Porn at TED in 2009. I became the only TED speaker to say the words, "come on my face," on the TED stage, 6 times in succession. The talk went viral as a result. And it drove this extraordinary global response to my tiny website that I had never anticipated. Thousands of people wrote to me from all around the world, young and old, male and female, straight and gay, including from South Africa, by the way. And I realized I'd uncovered a huge global social issue. And so I felt a responsibility to take Make Love Not Porn forwards in a way that would make it much more helpful, far-reaching, and effective. So I turned it into a business designed to do good and make money simultaneously, which, by the way, is what I believe all business should do. So today, Make Love Not Porn is, as I said earlier, pro-sex, pro-porn, pro-knowing the difference. We are the world's first and only user-generated, 100% human-curated social sex video sharing platform. So we're kind of what Facebook would be if it allowed you to socially, sexually self-express, which it clearly doesn't. The way to think about us is, if porn is the Hollywood blockbuster movie, Make Love Not Porn is the badly needed documentary. We are a unique window onto the funny, messy, loving, wonderful sex we all have in the real world. And as you said, Bronwyn, what we're doing is we are socializing, normalizing, and destigmatizing sex, bringing it out of the shadows into the sunlight to promote consent, communication, good sexual values and behavior. We are literally sex education through real world demonstration.
Excellent. But there is still stigma in the sector. And I know there's very quantified stigma, something that you've been quite vocal about on the various platforms that I've followed you, in that funding has not exactly flowed towards your platform, despite the fact that there is clearly demand, and more than demand, there's clearly a social need and requirement for this sort of service / education, as fun as it may be. What are some of the resistance that you found in talking about the subject that is so natural? I mean, let's face it, very few of us would be here on this planet without those particular acts, right? There's very few of us that have been grown in labs quite yet, or that have been naturally selected or unnaturally selected at this point, although those numbers might change as we go to the future. But why, or can you just describe a bit of the stigma or the resistance you found to people not just wanting to talk about it, but wanting to open up their wallets and their investment pounds, rands, dollars into your cause?
Absolutely. And you know, the interesting thing, Bronwyn, is that in the 11 years since I launched Make Love Not Porn as a business, we've had a universally positive response from people all around the world. My only obstacles have, as you say, been business and financial ones. So what I didn't realize when I embarked on this venture was that I and my tiny team would fight an enormous battle every day just to keep Make Love Not Porn operational, let alone grow it. Because every piece of business infrastructure any other tech startup takes for granted, we can't. The small print always says no adult content. And that's all pervasive. You know, as you say, challenges raising funding, couldn't get banked, problems putting payments in place, banned from advertising. The fact that we're still here 11 years later is testament to how much the world wants what we do. And to your question about investors specifically, you know, here's the interesting thing about my challenges raising funding. And by the way, I will just say that so far I've kept Make Love Not Porn operational for 11 years on just $3 million of funding from one investor. That's an extraordinary feat. And so I'm now working to raise a serious round of funding to scale Make Love Not Porn and build out some product expansions. But as I say, here's my challenge. I know that my investors are out there, and there are a ton of them. There are a ton of them in every country in the world, including South Africa, by the way. They are impossible to find by the usual means because they all have one thing in common. Your willingness to fund Make Love Not Porn is entirely a function of your personal sexual journey. It's a function of your personal lens on sex and sexuality that's been shaped by your own experience of it. And obviously, I have no way to research and target for that. Especially because sex is the one area where you cannot tell from the outside what anybody thinks on the inside. The people who look like they would totally get it don't. The people who look like complete prudes do. And so my strategy deliberately is I put what I'm doing out there all the time. Across all my social channels, I do every media interview, I go on every podcast, because I have to make synaptic connections happen that will attract those investors to me. Now, theoretically, this is a long, slow, painful, and highly inefficient process. In practice, it does actually work. I've been gobsmacked at the amount of incoming investor interest I've found on LinkedIn. And by the way, if you had told me 10 years ago that one day I would say I'm all about LinkedIn, I would have laughed in your face. Today, I'm all about LinkedIn. So the great news is that I am finding investors, but it is a slow process. And it does rely on, as I say, me putting Make Love Not Porn out there and being fortunate enough to coincide with an investor who gets it. But the investors who get it are absolutely out there, and I hope a number of them are absolutely listening to this podcast.
Well, you are at least a slightly fortunate position in that you have a personal platform and literally a platform to sort of back up what you're talking about here. But you touched on one of the issues that I wanted to go into a little bit more. And the first one is that you spoke about obviously finding the sort of investors who are interested and also willing to sort of speak up about these sorts of topics. That's one thing. But there's a deeper issue here, and that's what I'm sort of terming the deep stack denial of service that seems to surround your industry. And of course, many people are quite familiar with what happened with OnlyFans when the likes of MasterCard and Visa refused to process their payments because, as you mentioned earlier, they're involved with the adult industry supply chain. Very similar issues to what we see happening with sort of like the long line of greenlining in terms of eco-credentials if you want to be part of the whole sort of global green economy. But here, it does seem to be particularly unfair in that there is a large supply and demand for adult goods and services, and yet somehow our actual deep stack infrastructure, the economics, the pay gates, the laws, the regulations around these things are, if not explicitly, implicitly limiting the industry and forcing it to remain in the shadows, which doesn't help with the first issue you spoke about, finding people with the public perception that and the willingness to be involved with these sorts of projects publicly. So the two things kind of feed into each other. Why do you think our economic and political infrastructure is still so conservative? And again, I come from a country in South Africa where we've got a very liberal constitution, but still people are very conservative. I know I tried to run a lingerie store for 2 years and people only wanted sort of beige granny panties. No one was interested in anything, actually purchasing anything remotely risque. So that business venture clearly didn't work out. But there's a sort of this deep conservatism in society that even if you don't subscribe to it as an individual, as a business, you're still beholden to it. So there's a set of values that are not democratic values, they're not constitutional values, but they still actually enforced at a scale that there's very few ways to work around it. What are your thoughts on that? And if you do have any comments on how there are opportunities or not to work around those deep stack denial of service issues in your space?
Bronwyn, that is a fantastic question. I'm so glad you asked it. So I'll answer the first part of your question, which is why this is the case. And then I'll come on to there absolutely are opportunities, and they are precisely what I'm working on right now. So there are three reasons, broadly speaking, for how ludicrously repressed we are about the universal air of human experience we're all most fascinated by, most engaged with, and most fucked up about. And by the way, dollar signs all over that shit, investors. So the three reasons are, first of all, centuries of repression, religion, socio-cultural dynamics in every single country in the world. So what we're talking about is a global phenomenon. Reason number two, the patriarchy. Because historically, every institution, including government and religion, has been male-dominated. We as women have never been allowed to bring our lens to bear on human sexuality, and the world is a poorer place for it. And reason number three, very straightforwardly, is there are not enough people like me. And what I mean by that is the world makes it bloody difficult, as you've observed, to innovate and disrupt social narratives around sex. Many people have tried and given up. And I don't blame them, because my life is shitty on a daily basis because of what I do. We need many more people like me who will not give up no matter what. And so what I've been doing about this is, for 14 years, Bronwyn, I've been parallel pathing two things: working to build Make Love Not Porn, and working to change the business and cultural context around it. Because when you have a truly world-changing startup, you have to change the world to fit it, not the other way around. And so I'm all about building solutions to my own problems. And so when I mentioned earlier that I'm working to raise a serious round of funding, not just to scale my core business, Make Love Not Porn, but to build out a number of product expansions, one of which is, by the way, the one I've been asked for since day one by parents and teachers, which is the 0 to 18 and beyond sex education expansion, MakeLoveNotPorn.academy. And listeners, if you go to the URL, MakeLoveNotPorn.academy, you'll see my vision laid out there. But to answer your question specifically, I'm also raising funding to do two other things. The first is um, I want to build the Stripe of sex tech. And for our listeners, Stripe is the API that enables sites to take credit cards easily online. Right now, Stripe will not work with adult content. PayPal won't work with adult content. Mainstream credit card processors won't work with adult content. So I and my fellow adult ventures have to work with adult-friendly payment processors who, because anybody adult has nowhere else to go, charge extortionate fees. I pay out 12% of my revenue every month in payment processing fees alone, versus a mainstream rate that is 3% or less. That's a massive business growth inhibitor. So I want to build the Stripe of sex tech because there are unicorns to be made in infrastructure that welcomes legal, ethical, transparent sex tech ventures like mine. The Stripe of sex tech cleans up. Now, the key to the Stripe of sex tech is not the technology, because that's the easy part. The key is the bank that underwrites it. I have to say, if you told me 14 years ago I would spend this much of my life talking to payment processors and banks, I wouldn't have believed you. But I have. And so the good news is that I am now both in a discussion with a bank that sees the opportunity, is interested in underwriting the Stripe of sex tech, and I'm in conversations with investors who see the enormous revenue generator and value builder that is enabling, as I said, legal, ethical, transparent sex tech and adult ventures to be able to process payments at the mainstream rates everybody else does. Because I have to tell you, the answer to everything that worries people about porn and adult and sex generally is not to shut down, censor, clamp down, block, repress. It is instead to open up. Open up the dialogue around all of this in a way that I'm thrilled you're doing, Bronwyn. Open up to welcoming and supporting and funding entrepreneurs like me who want to disrupt all of this for the better. And open up to allowing us to do business in the same way everybody else does. Because when you do that, you completely transform the landscape of adult. I like to repurpose in this context Wayne LaPierre of the NRA's infamous gun control quote. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a business is a good guy with a better business. That's what I'm doing. And I am also raising funding, Bronwyn, to build a solution to another problem I think it's important our audience understand. Because right now, Make Love Not Porn is banned from advertising anywhere. We cannot advertise on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, Google, YouTube, Reddit, I ask you, by the way. And it's not just us. This is utterly gendered. Any female lens sexual health and wellness venture is also banned. Menstruation, menopause, fertility ventures can't advertise. In the meantime, male sexual health and wellness ventures, not a problem, which is why we see erectile dysfunction solutions advertising freely and building huge unicorn businesses off the back of that. So my background is 38 years working in advertising, which is extremely useful for what I do now, because I have spent 38 years working in the business of getting people to do things they originally had no intention of doing, which is advertising. So I'm raising funding to build my own ad tech product at Make Love Not Porn. And this ad tech will operate on the complete opposite of the existing ad tech model, which, as you know, is reach, eyeballs, clickbait, shit ton of fraud. I want to build ad tech that serves ads that people actively want to watch. So much so it'll be destination viewing in itself, which is why I'm calling it Here for the Ads. And there are three reasons why people want to watch the ads my ad tech is going to serve. The first is that when this is funded and built, I'm going to open up this ad tech to everybody like me who is currently banned for advertising, which, as I said earlier, is a very broad range of businesses. And you know this, Bronwyn, given your lingerie business. But also importantly, it's not just small businesses, it's the big players. My friends at Procter & Gamble, Unilever, Essity, Reckitt, they can't advertise sanitary protection, condoms, lube the way they want to either. So we're talking huge revenue. But therefore, the first reason people will want to see these ads is because These are ads for products designed to help us all in these most intimate areas of lives we're desperate for help with. But you can't see these ads anywhere because they're banned. So from a purely informational, educational perspective, people want to see these ads. But the second reason is, on here for the ads, you can advertise any bloody way you like. No censorship, no holds barred. And I use the word bloody advisedly because Sanpro ads, forget the blue ink on the pad, bring on the blood, have fun with it. We're talking every ad agency and brand's dream creative brief. Be funny, engaging, entertaining in all of these areas, which is why here for the ads will have a share button. Because people are going to want to forward these ads to everybody they know. This will be the only ad tech where going viral is a built-in feature, not a happens by chance. And the third reason people want to watch these ads is because at the heart of everything we do at Make Love Not Porn lies human curation. This is ad tech you apply to be allowed to advertise on. Our human curators will decide whether A, we endorse your brand or product, you've got to be legitimate, and B, whether your advertising of sufficient quality of engagement entertainment to be served on a channel that is all about ads that people actively want to watch. And I want to pilot this on Make Love Not Porn to begin with. But the aim, Bronwyn, is to prove concept. Because right now, the people banning Make Love Not Porn and other ventures like mine from advertising, and by the way, this applies to infrastructure as a whole, they don't know what we'd be like if they allowed us to advertise, use their services. They just know it'd be really bad. In their heads, they have this abstract concept, Sodom and Gomorrah will ensue. When I can show you an ad channel where the brands are legitimate, the sky does not fall, the ads are fantastic, people are loving them, they're going viral at the rate of knots, and we're making a shit ton of money, that is when not only can I turn here for the ads into an ad exchange that plugs in everywhere else, I break down the barriers for all of us to advertising across the internet as a whole. That's the game plan.
It's really, really clever. I mean, tap into human nature anyway and give people what they want. I mean, what an absolutely novel idea. Like, how many businesses and lawmakers don't seem to want to do that these days? But I do hear that you are making a bit of a bet. You are making a bet that the reason that people are gravitating to, shall we call it, sort of traditional porn, is because they're not aware of any viable alternatives. What are your thoughts on the odds of, once people are exposed to alternatives like Make Love Not Porn or any of the other various healthy sex and real sex products and services and platforms that exist out there that aren't in popular consciousness, what are the odds that being exposed to your ads, your creative platform, your products, and still obviously having access to that traditional porn sector, that they choose yours rather than choosing traditional porn? And to complicate that question a little bit more, what are the chances they choose not even traditional porn, but new gen porn, particularly the AI generated, hyper personalized, super plasticized product just for you that seems to be the new kid on the block? So between those competitors, once you are in consciousness, how do you think you're going to stack up?
Sure. And again, a great question, Bronwyn. Loving this interview, by the way. Really appreciate it. First of all, very important for our audience, Make Love Not Porn is not a competitor to porn. You know, that is why, as I said, our tagline is, we are pro-sex, pro-porn, pro-knowing the difference. We are the only real-world counterpoint and complement to porn. And that's why I use the analogy of, if porn is the Hollywood blockbuster movie, we are the documentary. Because people like watching movies, people also like watching documentaries. Sometimes move for a movie, sometimes move for documentary. But here's the thing. So the reason I know that there is a massive scale of opportunity for Make Love Not Porn is two especially key indicators right now. As I mentioned, we are banned from doing paid search ads on Google. That is especially frustrating because right now, all around the world, every day, people search for Make Love Not Porn without knowing that we exist. And what I mean by that is the top organic search terms that send traffic to us are make love, not porn, real sex, not porn, video sexo na porno, make love not porn, where they don't know there's a company actually called that. One young man told me that he found us when he Googled porn that is not porn. He was so fed up with everything out there, wanted something different, had no idea what to search for. When you search porn that is not porn, you find Make Love Not Porn. That is how much the world wants us and knows it needs us, because we answer the question everyone has literally been asking since the dawn of time, which is, what is everybody else really doing in bed? And now they can find out through Make Love Not Porn. The other indicator of our opportunity is, as you may not know, at the end of every year, Pornhub releases a year in review, where it analyzes its gigantic trove of data across its huge platform and identifies key trends. When Pornhub's Year in Review 2022 was released earlier this year, they identified the #1 trend across their huge platform as what they call reality. People are looking for real. And when that study came out, I shared the shit out of it all over social, and I said, what all those people are looking for, although they don't know it yet, is Make Love Not Porn. So those are two key indicators, but I'll give you another one. Because we're banned for advertising, our growth has been entirely organic, driven by two things: organic search and media coverage. Every time anybody writes about us all around the world, and one benefit of being a controversial venture is we get a ton of media coverage without even, reaching out for it. Whenever one writes about us in any country, that country instantly rockets to be #2 in traffic after the US, normally our biggest market, regardless of how small it is. And if it's a big country, it overtakes the US. So, for example, a few years ago, someone wrote about us in Serbia, tiny, #2 in traffic after the US. That someone were covered in Switzerland, also minuscule, #2 in traffic. A couple of years ago, we were covered in South Korea's biggest daily newspaper. I woke up to South Korea as our #1 source of traffic, accounting for 56% of it. That is how much the world wants us, again, and knows it needs what we do. And by the way, the frustrating thing is that without funding, as yet, we only operate in English. South Korea is one of those markets where English is not that widely spoken and understood. There was a very high bounce-off rate because, obviously our site was not navigable, but when it's English language only. And that's another thing I'm going to put right with funding.
I really love that. I'm so glad that the data is backing up what you have to say. It definitely ties into my thesis that having looked back at the last few years, in fact, what I think the COVID years were a tipping point for, one of those things. There were a few tipping points that took place in those years. The one was the difference between humanity being for the masses and technology being for the elite, and that pivot to really real human connection in just about any industry becoming the luxury, whereas the digital alternative is becoming the mass product, the discounted mass product, much like the difference that happened with like a mass manufactured pottery that was originally for the rich, but once it became actually mass, handmade pottery is now for the rich, and mass-made factory-made goods are for the rest of us. So this idea that actual human connection, that something real in the sea of things that have been manufactured, made, and commoditized is definitely a trend that I've been looking at that's sort of counter to what people's natural understanding of where we're progressing to. I think that argues quite neatly against the sort of AI perfect girlfriend taking over from your real girlfriend argument, which you hear a lot at the moment. Sure, there are dangers of the incel young gentlemen across the world who can't find a real partner, but maybe a lot of that is due to the fact that they've only been exposed to fake partners that are presented as real in trad porn, and that being exposed to what real women are actually like might actually give them better odds with them. So the whole demand and the supply that points towards a very artificial future is contested. I think these sort of contestations are hugely valuable at this point in time as things become more digitized. And why I like your project is that it's not rejecting technology, it's not rejecting future, it's not rejecting the latest advances in information science and social science and all the rest of it, but rather it's embracing them in a way to enhance real human connection rather than to drive wedges between the two. So it's doubling down on reality is the USP, even as it is a digital mass scale social platform. So I really do want to sort of commend you there. I think that's a fantastic point. But the other question,
sorry, I'd love to pick up on that if you don't mind, Bronwyn. Sorry to interrupt you, but you're absolutely right. I love the way you put that, because I'm all about using technology to make good things happen in the real world. And to your reference about incels and AI girlfriends, I'll tell you what's especially interesting. I designed Make Love Not Porn to be fully diverse and inclusive. And we are. Our members are now Make Love Not Porn stars. Our contributors range in age from 18 to 80, male, female, trans, non-binary, straight, LGBTQ, all races, ethnicities. We're a global platform. We get traffic from every country in the world. But in the 11 years we've operated, we've discovered that Make Love Not Porn is especially a revelation to men. More men send us grateful emails, leave appreciative comments than anybody else, because we are something utterly unique that men will find nowhere else on the internet, which is a safe space where men can be and watch other men being open, emotional, and vulnerable around sex. You would not believe the number of men who write to us regularly and say, I just watched my first video of Make Love Not Porn, and afterwards I cried. I wish society understood the opposite of what it thinks is true. Women enjoy sex just as much as men, and men are just as romantic as women. Yet neither gender is allowed to openly celebrate either fact. We'd all be better off if they were. I picked up a wonderful Twitter exchange last year between two men. The first man tweeted, this was obviously a joke, he tweeted, hey guys, got this really weird fetish. I've got this kink where I want to watch porn where people are honest, loving, loyal, decent, and really like each other. Hit me up with your hottest links, please. Another man replied and said, there's this website called MakeLoveNotPorn where you can watch real couples making love. He said, I watched a video where the woman said to her man, I love you, while they're making love. He said, sincerely, I cried when I heard that. Make Love Not Porn is one of the solutions to toxic masculinity. As a unique business, we have a unique capability, the power to change people's sexual attitudes and behavior for the better in a way that nothing else can. And what I've just shared with you, Bronwyn, is evidence of why our mission ultimately is to help end rape culture globally. We help end rape culture by doing something incredibly simple that nevertheless nobody else is doing. We end rape culture by showing you how wonderful great consensual communicative sex is in the real world. Our social sex videos role model good sexual values and good sexual behavior. And here's the important part. We make all of that aspirational versus what you see in porn and popular culture. Men leave comments in our videos like, one man said, this video makes me want to be a better man in the bedroom and in life. That's what we can do, and we have 11 years of proof of concept.
I'm so glad you said that, because that was the next question I was going to ask you anyway. It was about how you are demystifying or addressing head-on the dual taboos of masculine vulnerability and female sexuality. But I wanted to zero in on the female sexuality bit, because you made a few comments on that. In that even sort of female healthcare products, like there is nothing sexy about menstrual care, but yet that is bucketed as being evidence of female sexuality and therefore treated as a sexual taboo rather than as a health concern. And why do you think that is? Why do you think we are so frightened of females being fully engaged, consensual sexual partners? Because what I certainly find interesting, and I've introduced your site to a few friends of various genders.
I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled.
And I have seen that like women find it less embarrassing than talking about traditional porn. And that's the best phrase I have for it. So excuse me for going back to that.
Yeah, sure.
Less embarrassing because it's more real and more honest. But men find it more embarrassing to admit that they've been watching this sort of lovemaking, right? That makes them feel quite uncomfortable to admit, even if they do enjoy it, as you say, and even if they do find connection with it. I think they find it uncomfortable because it connects, rather than finding it uncomfortable because it disconnects or they find it in some way taboo or disgusting. That's not the impression that I'm getting. But this idea of women actually enjoying themselves and men enjoying women enjoying themselves is so uncomfortable for sort of popular discourse to talk around, whereas women being coerced or women obviously acting in situations that no actual human female would actually find any sort of pleasure or enjoyment in is somehow more socially acceptable to talk about. So in other words, female sexuality, when it's decoupled from fully enthusiastic consent, let's put it that way, is such a societal taboo compared to enthusiastic consent. Like why are women not supposed to enjoy themselves? And I think that's sort of the crux of the issue that makes general society find this so disconcerting, because regular porn is fine. I mean, politicians can be caught doing this now. It's no problem, right? It's just porn, mom, you know, like, which is interesting.
Well, you know, the first thing I would say, Bronwyn, is that, and by the way, I get frustrated when people use the word porn like it's all one big homogenous mass. That's like using the word literature to say it's all the same thing. You know, the landscape of porn is as rich and infinitely varied as the landscape of literature, as many genres, subgenres. So, but I know that what you're talking about is, let's say, you know, broadly speaking, mass market mainstream porn, the kind you'll find on the tube sites, which is basically male lens porn that mistakenly thinks that men are the only consumers. And by the way, you know, I want our listeners to know that because this is something a lot of people aren't aware of, there is a massive monopoly in the porn industry, which would not be allowed to exist in any other industry, but nobody wants to bring antitrust legislation to porn. A company called MindGeek owns everything. And by the way, MindGeek recently rebranded themselves with a name that's so boring I've completely forgotten what it is. It starts with A. That's all I can remember. Anyway, MindGeek owns Pornhub, YouPorn, RedTube, Men.com, Brazzers, you know, Sex.com, etc., etc. And sorry.
Mainstream porn, very mainstream.
Yeah. And basically, as with a monopoly in any industry, that strangles independent creativity and innovation. I have many friends who are brilliant, independent, queer female pornographers creating very innovative, disruptive porn. They don't get the traffic, the numbers, the revenue they deserve because MindGeek has a stranglehold on everything, and also, by the way, is pirating their content and ripping it off. I bring that up because, you know, to your question, Bronwyn, I go back to my point about the patriarchy. So when people are internalizing, you know, mainstream porn, it's so interesting. I mentioned earlier, I'm very proud of the fact I date younger men. I date them casually and recreationally. I date a lot of them. Therefore, I am my own research lab for Make Love Not Porn. I see exactly how this plays out in the real world all the time. I'm very selective about who I date. I only date utterly lovely younger men because my number one criteria is they have to be a very nice person. And I have fantastic radar for very nice people. You know, I date lovely younger men in an atmosphere of mutual trust, respect, affection, liking. And nevertheless, when we are in bed, I see them modeling the body language that says, my dick is the center of the universe. Because that's what male lens mainstream porn, they've unconsciously internalized. It's all about me. It's all about the man, you know. And you know, what I designed to Make Love Not Porn to do is, so I designed to Make Love Not Porn around my own beliefs and philosophies, one of which is that everything in life starts with you and your values. So I regularly ask people this question: what are your sexual values? And no one can ever answer me because we're not taught to think like that. Our parents bring us up to have good manners, work ethic, sense of responsibility, accountability. Nobody ever brings us up to behave well in bed. But they should, because in bed, values like empathy, sensitivity, generosity, kindness, honesty, trust, respect are as important as those values are in every other area of our lives where we're actively taught to exercise them. In a world which does not talk openly about and educate about sex, what we default to is exactly what you've described, which is patriarchal, misogynistic norms. And in a world equally where every industry is male dominated, you know, we still fight for equal representation in every single sphere of life. Unfortunately, you know, those are these societal dynamics that many men are subject to, which they need more ventures like mine to get them out from under. You know, this is why I say Make Love Not Porn is a revelation to men. And by the way, you know, whatever discomfort men may profess, you know, the men who write to us, the men who comment, are fundamentally moved and changed by what they see on Make Love Not Porn. And again, I can point to many, many amazing emails and comments. And so this is why it's so important, Bronwyn, that I raised the funding to scale Make Love Not Porn to be the Facebook of social sex, which is how big I wanted to be. Because I can tell you that right now, you know, and Make Love Not Porn, we've built an amazing community based on shared sexual values. And if you look at the comments on any of our videos, you will see men absolutely reinforcing and endorsing each other's openness and vulnerability. And, honestly, a lot of the comments that we get on Make Love Not Porn make me choke up, as do the emails. They are so moving. And so whatever men may profess publicly to hew to societal constructs of masculinity within their friend group, I can promise you that on Make Love Not Porn, you see what they really feel. And they are absolutely learning. Gen Z loves us. Gen Z brings a completely different openness and approach to really wanting very different things from relationships, from dating, and from their sex lives. We one of our videos, because obviously we showcase the messiness and the accidents. So we have a video where, it's a Make Love Not Porn style couple, and the guy suddenly mid-sex prematurely ejaculated. It was a shock to all involved. Whoa, it's hysterically funny. And so they shared this video because we welcome, as I said, the accidents. And a young man, Gen Z, and we know that because he's self-identified with his age. I think he was 26. He left a comment saying, I'm 26. I've only recently started having sex. This video was so wonderful because, I'm really nervous during sex. Is it okay to laugh at this? What do I do here? And this was just fantastic. He raved about it. He ended up saying, this video was wonderful for so many reasons that are not to do with just sex. And that's what we deliver.
Yeah, it's definitely a conversation that we are well overdue to have, because on the one hand, our Western world, if you want to put it that way, sexual revolution was like in the past, right? And we have birth control now, we have nominal gender rights in the workplace and all the rest of it, but there's still a whole lot of taboo that we haven't dealt with because we haven't decided we can talk about it, right? And as long as we don't talk about it, it remains something that is shameful, that's in the shadows. And I think that part of that is also perpetuating quite a lot of poor choices in lawmaking out of a sense of fear, but also a sense of taboo that is limiting freedom and expression, but also limiting healthy discourse under the veneer of trying to protect people. And this kind of comes back to the conversation as to why the likes of Stripe or Visa or MasterCard are nervous or anxious about allowing payments in the adult industry. Very similar to how now Apple is going back. I think they're having these conversations around the sort of online harms bills that are going on, and the wanting to sort of look at the imagery even retail consumers, just you and I, would be sharing with our nearest, dearest, our lovers, our friends, and that be wanting this like increasing kind of surveillance of the transaction of information, never mind the transaction of money, because we are afraid of sex and everything goes with it. And part of that fear is unjustified. Part of that fear is to do with taboo and to do with conventions we haven't articulated, that we haven't had that fully sort of cleansing moment with. But part of that sense of fear is backed in reality, in that we do know that sexual exploitation of women for the creation of entertainment purposes is, of course, real. So how do you, from your perspective, how do you manage to counteract those sorts of real concerns without falling into the trap of perpetuating taboos that don't need to exist? How do you manage to win, or at least persuade people towards the idea that most of us are sensible, that most of us, given the choices, make the right choices most of the time? And because of that, when we are developing laws and platforms around what payments can be processed, what information can be shared, what videos can be posted on what platforms, there's a line to be drawn around erring on the side of caution versus erring on the side of continued repression, right? So how do you navigate those conversations? These are realities. I mean, literally, I'm busy putting together a research report at the moment with online harms bills, and the justification is around exploitation of children and women, which is very hard to argue against. But those sort of skeleton key laws can lock down a lot more than what they intended to do due to outsized fear. I certainly believe can be overcome through open discussions like this. So we talk about the reality rather than just the fears and the bogeyman in the corner.
It can be overcome by open discussions. It can also be overcome by something else, Bronwyn. So The reason for everything you've just highlighted is that every platform you referenced is founded by white men. Okay, so let me tell you what the solution is, and let me contextualize this in the landscape of the tech industry as a whole. The young white male founders of the giant tech platforms that dominate all our lives today, they are not the primary targets, online or offline, of harassment, abuse, sexual assault, racism, violence, rape, revenge porn. Therefore, they did not and they do not proactively design for the prevention of any of those things on their platforms. And we see the results of that around us every single day. Those of us who are most at risk every single day, women, Black people, people of color, LGBTQ, the disabled, we design safe spaces and safe experiences, but we don't get funded. Only 1.7% of all venture capital last year went to female founders, and that is why we have still not yet seen the future of the internet as it could be, designed and built through the female lens at scale. I designed Make Love Not Porn through the female lens to be the safest place on the internet, because I designed around what everybody else should have, nobody else did, human curation. There is no self-publishing of anything on Make Love Not Porn. Our curators watch every frame of every video from beginning to end before we approve or reject, and we publish it. No one else does that. We review every post on every member profile. And by the way, on Make Love Not Porn, your posts can be as safe work or not safe work as you like. You know, we call them Make Love Not Porn social. We want to be the new Tumblr. But nevertheless, we review, approve or reject, and publish them. No one else does that. We review every comment on every video before we approve or reject and publish it. No one else does that. We can vouch for every single piece of content on our platform in a way that nobody else can. And bear in mind, we're tiny bootstrapping, have no money, and we've human curated everything for 11 years. Imagine what Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, etc. could do with their billions if they chose to. Safety on the internet is not a matter of viability, it's a matter of will. And the reason I'm saying this in response to what you just asked me, Bronwyn, is because we design through the female lens for safety. And when we get funded, we have a safe internet. In the meantime, we're not getting funded. We don't have that. And so when you are a white male founder and you've basically built a gigantic platform, you never gave a thought to all of these harms resulting from it, your only recourse when you are unwilling to accept you need to completely reconceive the whole platform, your only recourse is retrospective. And that's why the young white male founders resort to two measures: algorithmic censorship, knee-jerk, okay, and as you know, a very blunt tool that basically blocks out all the things it should be welcoming and keeps in all the things it shouldn't. And secondly, the wrong kind of legislation, okay? That no adult content clause on Stripe is because Stripe was founded by two white men who didn't give any thought to, what they might want to embrace and what they might not. And now go, especially with a bunch of investors at their back and a bank underwriting the whole thing, let's just be blanket about this, as opposed to understanding as a female founder would, how incredibly important it is to welcome in nuance and find a way to embrace that which is healthy and safe. And by the way, also design safety into your platform that encourages that, versus simply a blanket, not going to touch anything remotely adult with a barge pole, which includes menstruation, menopause, education, sexual health, etc., etc. And especially female sexual health. So, this is why I'll be very straightforward, Bronwyn. The answer to all of this is very simply the only thing holding back the future of an internet designed and built through the female lens that would make all of us safer and happier is lack of access to capital. The only thing we need is investors and funding to not only build completely alternative platforms, but be the unicorns of the future in a way that completely displaces and supplants existing unicorns. And that's the message I want any South African investors listening to this to absolutely take away. You can fund us, And you can get gigantic returns while also creating gigantic social impact, because we're at a zeitgeist moment and we can build a future for the internet, including AI, that is completely different and way more lucrative. I've been saying for years that the reason why YouTube, Facebook, et al. Should be adopting our human curation model at Make Love Not Porn is because when they do, they will make even more money than they are currently. And the reason I say that is two things. The first is, when you announce that you are now going to human curate everything, that is not as gigantic a task as you think it is, because the moment you announce humanize or vet everything, you turn off the fire hose of the Nazis, the racists, the child abusers. When they know that content will no longer get through because every single piece of content is vetted by human eyes, you turn off the fire hose of all the shit you don't want. And the second thing is, when you human curate everything, you make way more revenue even than you are now, than you ever have before, because two keywords: brand safety. When you can guarantee to advertisers their ads will never, ever, ever run next to anything harmful, you quadruple, quintuple your advertising revenue, way beyond even the billions that you're making today. Okay, that's what the white men at the top do not get. That is the future. And by the way, our human curation model is eminently scalable. The analogy I draw is that our human curation workforce is simply our equivalent of any enterprise software unicorn's human sales force. Those billion-dollar unicorns hire thousands of people to sell their products into companies. Same deal. It's so easy to do, but that's the opportunity, investors. You can fund the future of the internet, designed and built through the female lens. And I'll give you, one last example, Bronwyn, if I may, because I've had an AI strategy to Make Love Not Porn for 5 years. Okay, and the only reason you've not seen an AI strategy through the female lens built and manifested is, again, because I have not yet raised the funding to do this. So we have something very unique at Make Love Not Porn. We have the world's only LVM, large video model, that is entirely human curated, and therefore is the only pool of entirely consensual real world sex video content. And I want to use that to build an algorithm for consent with a huge number of use cases. Because, for example, with Hollywood, movies, TV. So right now in popular culture all around us, there are many sex scenes. There are many sex scenes that purport to be consensual in the context of narratives about love relationships. But as we as women know, those sex scenes, when you have a male showrunner, a male director, a male scriptwriter, et cetera, those sex scenes model behavior that is non-consensual and scenarios that are fundamentally non-consensual. And so we have the ability, using AI, to build an algorithm of consent you can run any sex scene through to be sure that what we're representing is consensual, or criminal court, where, as you know, something like only 1% of all rape cases ever come to court. I think it's even lower in terms of convictions. So imagine, in an appalling he said, she said scenario where the onus is always on the victim to provide proof. Imagine an algorithm for consent that can actually help determine what was and wasn't consensual. Okay, that is ethical AI. That's an ethical deployment of AI through the female lens that I've not yet been able to raise funding for. Okay, that's, again, the future of the internet, designed and built through the female lens that creates a better world for all of us.
What an absolutely fascinating case study to end this on, because that's like, I've never heard anyone trying to retrofit essentially ethical and legal standards from evidence of enjoyment, right? So these people are clearly having fun. That means it's okay. And extrapolating that's a really unusual way to look at both AI and with your data set that you have there. But I think what you're really getting at, to kind of sum up with a lot of our conversation today, is this idea that we get more of what we pay for. We get more of what we invest. We get more of what we pay attention to. We get more of which sites we visit. So are we thinking about that, right? And as you pointed out, perhaps the things that we are paying time and attention to right now are not good for any of us, male, female, or anyone else. It's a case of perhaps we need to be thinking about what it is that we actually want, and looking, observing, performing, investing in more of what we actually enjoy, which should be just the most intuitive thing possible. And yet we seem to be sort of self-defeating creatures quite often, in that we go back to what we know. So hopefully conversations like this give us something else to think about and to start paying attention to, and to start paying for, whether as subscribers or as investors. But I do want to give you the last word to wrap this up before I let you go. So if you've got any concluding remarks, go for it. Otherwise, can you tell people where to find you, where to find your work, where to get in touch if they want to invest, converse, whatever?
Sure. So first of all, Bronwyn, I couldn't agree more with what you've just said. I've been saying for years to men, we live in a world where the default setting is always male. Men, you have no idea how much happier you would be living and working in a world that is equally 50-50, informed, influenced, led and designed by women just as much as by men. And, you know, Make Love Not Porn in that context operates in the single biggest market of them all. Not sex, not porn, the market of human happiness. So yes, investors who get that, hit me up, Cindy at MakeLoveNotPorn.com. Everybody, I would love you to go to MakeLoveNotPorn.tv. Please sign up and help support what we're calling the social sex revolution. The revolution part is not the sex, it's the fact we're finally making it social. Please support us by subscribing. Subscriptions start at $10 a month, so they're very affordable. Please consider becoming a Make Love Not Porn star. We want you to make South African love not porn. Represent South Africa. And you can follow me and Make Love Not Porn on Twitter and Instagram. We're at Cindy Gallop, at Make Love Not Porn. You can find me on LinkedIn. On Facebook, we're at MLNP TV. And, I would just love you to, spread the word and encourage the whole world to make love, not porn.
Thank you so much. Been an absolute star.
It's a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and rate us on all your preferred podcast platforms. If you'd like to find out more about what we're doing, please join our Substack community via the link in the comments below. And as always, we'd love to hear your suggestions for future guests and conversation topics.